So a couple of weeks ago, we were testing some affordable GPUs in with the i3 10th series i3 10105F or 10105F. And I noticed a few things. I actually split that video up into two different things because the RX560 that I was testing to begin with was showing me some weird things compared to an older Dell setup. Today we go back and investigate that a little bit. All right, so it kind of started when I was just trying to see some affordable GPU options with a budget type CPU. I figured maybe, you can spend a little bit on the GPU, get whatever GPU you wanted or needed that was in, now becoming affordable. Maybe spend a little bit less on the CPU that you could upgrade later, and in 6 months time, 7 months time, a year's time or whatever, have yourself a pretty good system that, even though it might be a couple years old or a couple, generation or two back, would still be pretty solid. One of the first things I tested was an AMD. It was an RX560 4 gig, and I ran a full slate of benchmarks with this. Tested it against a Dell pre-built that had an i5 4670 in it. Now, what surprised me, I expected a couple of different things here. I expected either everything to max out and both of them to be relatively same, within a couple of frames of each other because the GPU was maxed out, or that was it. Or I expected the newer i3, because it is several generations newer than that previous i5. I expected those numbers to be a little bit higher, figuring there was more CPU room, and the GPU was fine with that newer CPU and had a little bit more room to stretch its legs. What I was not expecting is Forza Horizon 4 and Horizon Zero Dawn to be having better numbers, significantly better numbers, than the newer i3 with the same configuration with the RX560 in it. This confused me quite a bit because the older i5 is a 4-core 4-thread, while the newer i3 is a 4-core 8-thread, and it's several generations newer. So I had to go back and do some retesting. Part of what really got me, and the reason for the retest, was because in some cases the RX560 was maxing out probably between 40 and 50 frames per second with the i3, and that was fine. But I was in some cases getting up to 60 frames per second with the older configuration in the old Dell with the old i5, and that was very confusing. So I went back, and part of doing testing is going back and redoing all your drivers and starting with brand new drivers. You always want to do that, right? Well, after I did that, guess what happened? Everything completely leveled out. Now, I ran all 7 tests, and they were run on the i3, the newer i3, the older i5, and although I'm not going to bore you with all the benchmarks, I will go ahead and show you a kind of a cross-section of all 7, and they were within a frame of each other all the way down. So this is a limitation of the RX560, which is consistent with what I was testing in the i3, the newer setup. Those numbers should go across. Anything that has a decent amount of processing power should max that GPU out. And so that's going to be the top end of it. It is going to be pretty decent in games. You will be able to game at 1080p at lower frame rates. If you want a little bit higher frame rates, step it up to or step it down to 720p, and you should be fine. There's no issues with that. But this did kind of level the playing field when I did the brand new drivers. Now, why any drivers would de-optimize a graphics card, I don't know. I'm not really sure of that. I do know there are some things like FSR and some other, super resolution stuff that AMD is introducing that can help with that. I didn't test that in this case, but I do know that can help get some of that performance back and even improve some performance that's moderate. So it's definitely worth. You can definitely game on this. It's not going to be the top of the line specs, but it is going to be decent performance and decent gain. Or a decent experience. You're not going to have any kind of issues with an experience, and all in all, it's going to be similar to console gaming. Consoles, typically the older generation consoles, were all set to 30 frames per second. Now the newer ones are set to 60 frames per second. You shouldn't have any problem at all getting that out of something like an RX560. So still a decent deal, and now that the prices are dropping on that, it's even a better deal. So yes, that is a solid option for going with, say, an i3 or a budget type CPU. Not to be outdone, and not to, because I still had that question in my mind, is that i5 any better than the i3, I put a better graphics card. We went with the GTX 1660, which is one of the ones that I tested with the i3 to begin with. And lo and behold, it was who we thought it was. That i5 is just, I mean, it does not measure up to the i3. That 1660 was better with the i3, the newer CPU, in every test than it was with the i5. Does that mean the older i5 isn't any good? No, it's still very good. But it does show us that the i3 is a better processor. It is newer. It does handle more instructions per second. It's a good match. Either one of these are pretty good match. And in fact, when I was testing the i3, actually both of them, there was times when both of them carried an equal amount of load, or pretty equal amount of load between the CPU and GPU. So there wasn't anything to worry about there. It's a pretty good match, but it does show you that i3 is a better processor, is more refined, is going to do a better job than, say, an old one. Now, if you're looking at older CPUs and you're looking at older builds, do you want to try to save the extra money? Now, if you can find something used that is a really, really good deal or a good bargain, maybe. But part of the reason why we're testing this i3 is because it was only $88. And I got the motherboard, I think, for around $110. So for under $200, then you have to start worrying about your other stuff, like, you know, your memory or whatever. But a lot of these pre-builts, you may or may not, either with the older pre-built or the older hardware, you may or may not get a good deal on it. If you can get a good deal, then fine, that works. The other part of that, or the only problem with that, is making sure that whatever power supply is in some of these older, like office machines, is up to the task. Because I had to do sort of a jank setup and use two different power supplies to test this 1660. Yeah, so maybe put it in a different box. I don't know, but it is a decent deal. The main thing that I wanted to find out here is this i3 compared to the i5 with using these two graphics cards. Was I going crazy? Was I seeing things? What was the deal? What was going on? And coming to find out that yes, part of the issue that I had, or part of the conundrum that I was facing, or the reason why I thought I was losing my mind, was because the drivers had changed. And once I had installed and used the same drivers on everything, the latest drivers for, you know, graphics, CPU, everything. Once I had used the latest drivers for the graphics card, it brought everything right back into line, and it was exactly what I thought it was going to be. But at least it solves the question that I had and kind of puts my mind at ease. So anyway, I don't know if you got anything out of the video. If you did, or if you liked the video, go ahead and throw a like on it. If not, you can put a dislike. Leave me any kind of comments. What were your thoughts? There were some people that also, they commented on the other video, and I appreciate that because it gave me some other things to think about. And it made me, you know, kind of run through things through in my mind to make sure that I wasn't losing it. Not that it's not gone already, but at least I'm not losing it any worse. Anyway, that's all I have for this time, folks. So until next time, I'll see you later.